38 African generals assembled under one roof in Nairobi last month. To the casual observer, it looked like unity, a rare, powerful image of a continent standing together. But that's the illusion. Behind the handshakes and photo ops was something far more calculated, a covert strategy meeting between Africa's old military elite and the architects of US foreign policy. The summit, co-hosted by Kenya and the United States, wasn't about African-led security. It was the beginning of a narrative shift, a rebranding of an old enemy, now given a new face: terrorism. General Langley, the commander of AFRICOM, didn't mince words. In a press briefing, he declared the Sahel the epicenter of global terrorism, a bold claim, perhaps even reckless one. But one thing is clear: this label isn't just rhetoric, it's strategic framing. It marks the rebirth of an interventionist agenda under the shiny wrapper of counter-terrorism. The same Sahel region that only recently expelled US and French troops is now being remarketed as too dangerous to be left alone. This is no coincidence. Langley's statement was more than analysis. It was a declaration of narrative warfare. After losing the geopolitical story to young Pan-African voices on social media, the West is now rebranding its mission. Yesterday's justification was partnership. Today, it's terrorism. This rebranding gives cover to countries like Kenya and Côte to host expanded military operations while projecting the AES bloc as not just rebellious, but dangerous. Let's be clear. What happened in Nairobi wasn't a neutral conference. It was an emergency meeting of the empire. Kenya, a long-standing US security ally, is now being groomed as the new military anchor in East Africa. Meanwhile, Côte d'Ivoire plays the same role in West Africa, having just hosted Flintlock 2025, a major special ops exercise with US forces. These aren't scattered events. They are coordinated responses to the AES revolution. They signal that although the West lost the Sahel physically and lost the narrative to Pan-African youth, they are already reinventing a justification for return. That justification is terrorism, and it is the cornerstone of the West's next move. In the past, the West occupied Africa with boots. Now, they return with narratives and military logistics hidden beneath them. After Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso expelled French and US troops, the headlines screamed withdrawal. But in truth, there was no actual withdrawal. There was a pivot, a strategic repositioning. The West didn't pack up and go. They simply moved next door. Côte d'Ivoire and Kenya are now the command centers of this new phase. Flintlock 2025 took place in Abidjan just weeks before the Nairobi summit. The official story: counter-terrorism drills. The real story: redeployment. French troops, once kicked out of Burkina Faso, now operate freely from Ivorian soil. The Ivorian government, as reported by France 24, continues to deepen its defense with Paris. In East Africa, Kenya has become even more central. The Nairobi conference was more than just symbolism. It was strategy. 38 African generals lined up behind AFRICOM. And Langley once again invoked terrorism as the reason why the US must stay. Let's unpack that. The West, having lost credibility in the Sahel, now needs a new story to justify its growing presence elsewhere. And so, terrorism becomes the new villain. It's a familiar script, a vague, unending threat, a threat that just so happens to exist most heavily where the US troops were expelled. How convenient. But here's what's different now. They lost the narrative war. Young Africans, content creators, researchers, and organizers have shattered the monopoly of mainstream media. They expose what's really happening. That's why the West is rewriting the story. This isn't about partnership. It's not about helping Africa. It's about isolating the AES bloc, surrounding it with friendly government, and preparing the terrain for future operations, military or otherwise. Propaganda machine is being rebooted. Only this time, we are ready. The battle has moved from air bases to algorithms, from treaties to tweets, and the only thing more dangerous than foreign troops on our soil is foreign narratives in our minds. It wasn't bullets or sanctions that broke the West's hold on the Sahel. It was truth. Truth told by Pan-African youths, armed not with weapons, but with smartphones, podcasts, and Twitter threads. The US and France didn't just lose access to air bases, they lost control of the narrative. And now, in 2025, we are watching them try to rewrite the script from the scratch. Here is the uncomfortable reality. For decades, the West controlled Africa's narratives through international media, sponsored experts, and well-funded NGOs. They told us who our enemies were. They told us what stability looked like. And they told the world that Africa's problems could only be solved through foreign partnerships. Always military, always Western. But in just the last 3 years, that illusion collapsed. When the AES bloc expelled French and American forces, it didn't just shift geopolitics, it shattered the master narrative. Suddenly, the world was forced to witness African nations choosing sovereignty over submission. And that's where the script began. With the label epicenter of global terrorism, AFRICOM Commander General Langley handed the West a fresh storyline. Terrorism, now the convenient cover for re-engagement. But this time, it's not landing the same way, because the youths aren't waiting for permission to speak. They are narrating it in real time. On TikTok, clips mocking Nairobi summit went viral within hours. On YouTube, exposé breaking down AFRICOM's playbook are getting more views than official press briefings. Telegram channels and African blogs are decoding military logistics, tracking foreign troop movement, and exposing how training exercises are being used to prepare for something much bigger. This is no longer a one-way broadcast. It's a feedback loop of resistance, and it's working. Western diplomats still parade phrases like regional cooperation and shared values, but the comment section tells a different story, one filled with suspicion, analysis, and outrage. Pan-African networks are no longer fringe voices. They are the mainstream, and that terrifies the old powers, because they know what comes next. If you can't win the narrative, you start manufacturing a crisis. That's the real threat of this terrorism rebrand. It's not just about words, it's a setup, a psychological operation, a public excuse for private planning. They lost the mic. They are trying to take it back with force. Terrorism is real, but so is exploitation. And in Africa today, the two are becoming dangerously intertwined, not by accident, but by design. The West's latest obsession with Sahel instability isn't just a security concern. It's a Trojan horse, a cover narrative, a justification for re-entry. Let's look at the facts. After French and US troops were ordered out of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, something strange happened. Almost immediately, coordinated terror attacks began to spike. In early 2024, AFP reports confirmed an increase in assault across northern Mali and eastern Burkina Faso. In Niger, militants suddenly reappeared along the tri-border region right after the US was forced to shut down drone operations at Airbase 201 in Agadez. Coincidence? Not likely. At the Nairobi summit, AFRICOM Commander General Langley made a calculated move. He branded the Sahel the epicenter of global terrorism, warning that terror groups could spread to coastal nations if left unchecked. That phrase, epicenter, has since become the favorite line in Western diplomatic circles. But beneath it lies a dangerous agenda, because once a region is labeled a terror hub, intervention becomes a moral imperative. Military expansion becomes a humanitarian duty. And just like that, the AES states, once symbols of sovereignty, are rebranded as threats. But here's the catch. The US isn't sending troops back into Mali or Burkina Faso. Not yet. Instead, they are building military capacity around the AES. Côte d'Ivoire is negotiating new security deals behind closed doors. Kenya is expanding joint operations. And slowly, the ring tightens. It's not about saving Africa from terror. It's about countering Pan-African sovereignty. It's about constructing a surveillance belt armed with Western tech, Western boots, and Western leverage around nations that dare to say no. Once the troops are in, they don't just bring weapons, they bring influence over policy, over intelligence, over internal politics in the name of security. They gain access to the very soul of a state. And that, my friends, is the danger. Because once the Trojan horse is inside the gate, the fight is no longer at the border. It's at the core of your sovereignty. This isn't counter-terrorism. This is counter-sovereignty. The strategy isn't new. It's colonial in its bones. When the West cannot dominate through force, it divides, it isolates, it rewards loyalty with aid and punishes defiance with exclusion. And today, That old playbook is being rewritten in real time against the Alliance of Sahel States. The AES bloc, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso represent more than just a security pact. It's a declaration of African sovereignty, a rejection of foreign troops, a refusal to be used. But to the architects of Western policy, that's not sovereignty, it's insubordination. Enter the buffer state, Kenya and Côte d'Ivoire. Both nations have now emerged as the regional favorites in the West containment strategy. They hosted the most important Western military events of 2025. Kenya co-chaired the African Chief of Defense Conference in Nairobi, and Côte d'Ivoire hosted Flankler 2025. These were not symbolic gestures, they were statements of allegiance, and that allegiance is being rewarded with weapons, training, logistics, and silence. According to France 24, French troops forced out of Burkina Faso were seamlessly repositioned in Abidjan. Kenya too has received expanded US military support under the umbrella of AFRICOM. What's striking is not just the cooperation, it's the contrast. While Kenya and Côte d'Ivoire are praised as responsible partners, the AES states are demonized. In ECOWAS circles, they are branded as rogue. In Western media, they are portrayed as unstable. And in the diplomatic circles, they are quietly excluded. This is no accident. It's a siege, a geopolitical quarantine. The West is building a cordon around the AES, a perimeter of compliant allies, fortified with military power and diplomatic praise. The goal: prevent the spread of the AES doctrine that Africa can secure itself, govern itself, and speak for itself. Because if that idea spreads, if sovereignty becomes contagious, then the West's entire architecture of influence begins to collapse. So the AES must be boxed in, cut off, discredited. And what's most dangerous, this isn't just an external strategy, it's internal too. The West isn't only shaping how the world sees the AES, they are shaping how Africans see them, through media, through elite partnerships, through selective diplomacy. It's not just containment, it's psychological warfare. Let's strip away the jargon, the press releases, the communiques, the diplomatic doublespeak, because beneath all the talk of stability and security cooperation, one thing becomes painfully obvious. It's not terrorism the West fears most, it's sovereignty. Look closely at the timeline. Mali expelled French troops in 2022. Burkina Faso and Niger followed in 2023. Chad cut military ties in 2024, and Senegal followed in early 2025. None of these decisions were random. They were coordinated steps by African governments finally asserting full control over their defense architecture. No strings, no foreign boots, no backroom deals. And what was the reaction? Immediate condemnation, aid freezes, sanctions, exclusion from security summits. In the West, they weren't hailed as bold, independent nations. They were branded as risks, as pariahs, as unstable regimes. But here's the hypocrisy. While Mali is punished for kicking out French troops, Rwanda is praised for hosting them. While Burkina Faso is isolated for leaving ECOWAS, Côte d'Ivoire is rewarded with new American drills. The message is chillingly clear. You are free only if you obey. This isn't counter-terrorism. If this were about democracy, why are compliant autocrats embraced, while popular governments that challenge Western military presence are vilified? It's an old game. Dress up control as cooperation and rebel defiance as danger. And we've seen this before. In 1987, Thomas Sankara was assassinated after trying to make Burkina Faso self-reliant and anti-imperialist. In 1961, Patrice Lumumba was eliminated for asserting Congolese independence. In 2011, NATO reduced Libya, once Africa's most developed country, to rubble under the false banner of protecting civilians. Today, the script hasn't changed, only the cast has. The West doesn't fear failed states, it fears successful ones that refuse its leash. States that say we will secure ourselves, states that build alliances on African terms. The expanded bloc of sovereign states represent exactly that, and that's why it is being targeted, not for its weakness, but for its strength. Because in the eyes of the empire, African sovereignty is not a right, it's a threat. The West strategy in Africa is no longer about open conquest. It's about optics. The weapons have changed from tanks to terms, from soldiers to stories. Today, the real battlefield is not only on the front line of Niger or the airbase of Côte d'Ivoire. It is in the public mind. It is in the perception of war over what Africa is, who leads it, and what future we deserve. This is why terrorism narrative is so seductive. It simplifies, it distracts, it creates an enemy vague enough to justify anything, from drone strikes to military bases to regime change. And most dangerously, it turns African resistance into a threat and foreign intervention into salvation. But now, the script is unraveling. Young Africans across TikTok, X, Instagram, YouTube are rewriting it line by line. They are connecting the dots the mainstream media refuse to see. They are tracing the pipelines of military aid, exposing the hidden clauses in the so-called development packages, and asking the right questions. Who benefits? Who controls? Who decides? Kenya and Côte d'Ivoire may have signed on to the West containment agenda, but the people, the rising generation, are not fooled. They know that when the West says stability, it often means submission. And when it says partnership, it often means power imbalance. The AES bloc, for all its flaws, has shown what is possible when African nations stand together and say no, not just to troops, but to the lies that justify them. This is the real fight, not just for territory, but for truth, for narrative, for the soul of the continent. The question now isn't whether the West will continue its pressure. It will. The question is whether Africans across all regions, all tribes, all classes will see through the fog, connect the strategies, and defend not just borders, but the right to decide. Because in this new war, the war for perception, for autonomy, for meaning, vigilance is resistance, and resistance is freedom. This is Frontline Africa. If you value truth unfiltered and power reframed from an African lens, subscribe, like, and drop your thoughts. I am Ezekiel Enejeta. See you in the next one.